In the heart of the Indian Ocean lies the island of Madagascar, lush, green, and breathtaking. Today it is remembered for its unique wildlife, its rainforests, and its beauty. But nearly 2 centuries ago, this paradise became a kingdom of nightmares. At the center of it all was a queen unlike any the world had ever seen, or perhaps unlike any the world could endure. Her name was Ranavalona I. History would come to call her many things. The Mad Queen of Madagascar, the female Caligula, and most infamously, the Queen of Blood. For 33 years she ruled Madagascar with an iron fist, turning a once promising kingdom into a land of fear, isolation, and mass death. But how did an obscure young woman rise from the shadows to become one of the most ruthless rulers in history? To understand her story, we must travel back to the early 19th century. Ranavalona was not born to be queen. In fact, by the standards of her time, she should have lived her life in obscurity, forgotten by history. Born around 1788 as Ramavo, she was the daughter of a commoner. Nothing about her birth marked her for greatness. But fate, as it often does in history, intervened. Her father, a man of sharp instinct, once uncovered a plot to assassinate King Radama I, the great ruler who united much of Madagascar's central highlands. For his loyalty, the king rewarded him with an extraordinary gift. His daughter, Ramavo, was adopted into the royal household. This one act changed everything. Ramavo, once destined for anonymity, was now groomed as a consort in the royal palace. She would marry Prince Radama, heir to the throne. She was clever, observant, and calculating. Unlike many of the other women of the court, she seemed to understand something fundamental. Power was not simply given. It had to be taken, and it had to be protected at all costs. When King Radama I died, his son Radama I became king. Ramavo, now one of his wives, entered the world of politics at the highest level. Radama was no ordinary king. He was ambitious, modern, forward-thinking. He welcomed European advisors, missionaries, and soldiers into Madagascar. He forged treaties with Britain and France, opened schools, introduced the Latin alphabet, and embraced Western science and technology. He was determined to make Madagascar a modern kingdom. But for Ramavo this was a problem. She watched with growing suspicion as foreigners, white men in suits and uniforms, gained influence over her husband. They taught their strange religion, Christianity, to the Malagasy people. They brought guns, books, and ideas that threatened the traditions of the land. To Radama this was progress. To Ramavo it was weakness. She remained in the shadows, rarely speaking, always watching. Those who knew her later would describe her as cold, calculating, and patient. And patience was the key. Because when Radama I died in 1828 without an heir, the throne of Madagascar suddenly became a prize, and Ramavo was ready to seize it. The death of a king is always a dangerous moment in history. In Madagascar it was no different. With Radama gone, rival factions within the royal family and the military began to position themselves for power. But Ramavo moved first. She had quietly built alliances with key military officers and palace officials. She promised them rewards, land, titles, whatever it took. Most importantly, she secured the loyalty of Andrea Mahaja, a powerful and respected general. On the day Radama's death was announced, Ramavo struck. She declared that Radama himself had chosen her as his successor, that she alone was destined to rule. With the backing of the army, she proclaimed herself Queen Ranavalona I. Her rivals barely had time to react. Those who opposed her were eliminated, executed, their families slaughtered, their supporters hunted down. In one of her very first acts as queen, Ranavalona made it clear, she would not be challenged. And from that moment, paradise began to bleed. The early years of Ranavalona's reign shocked both her people and the foreign powers that had grown comfortable under Radama. Where Radama had embraced Europe, Ranavalona shut the door. Where Radama had welcomed Christianity, Ranavalona declared war on it. Where Radama had sought progress, Ranavalona returned to tradition, and used those traditions as weapons of fear. She reinstated the brutal practice of the Tangena ordeal, a trial by poison in which the accused were forced to swallow the toxic nut of the Tangena tree. If they survived, they were innocent. If they died, they were guilty. Tens of thousands would perish by this cruel ritual during her reign. And this was only the beginning. For Ranavalona believed that her rule could only be secured by fear. The people of Madagascar, who once sang songs of unity under Radama, now whispered in terror of their queen. The Europeans too were stunned. Their missions, their schools, their influence, all came under attack. Foreign advisors were expelled, traders were restricted, and Christianity itself was outlawed. To defy Ranavalona was to invite death. And yet, she ruled for 33 long years. What drove this queen? Was it paranoia? A thirst for power? Or was she, in her own twisted way, protecting her kingdom from the greed of empires that circled Madagascar like vultures? As we dive deeper into her reign, you will see how Ranavalona transformed Madagascar into one of the most feared and isolated kingdoms on earth. But you will also see the cost, the rivers of blood, and the legacy of terror she left behind. This is only the beginning. Thunder cracks, torches burn in the night. Soldiers march through the capital Antananarivo. Citizens hide in their huts, whispering fearful prayers. The coronation of Ranavalona I marked not just the rise of a new ruler, but the beginning of a reign drenched in fear. To secure her throne, she spilled royal blood. But now she would tighten her grip on the entire kingdom. What followed was a nightmare. Ranavalona wasted no time. Anyone who had even the faintest claim to the throne was hunted down. Princes, generals, even distant relatives. No one was safe. Scene shows soldiers dragging nobles from their homes, their cries piercing the night. To the people of Madagascar it was clear. This was not a queen who would be challenged. But it was only the first taste of her cruelty. One of the most feared practices in Madagascar was the Tangena ordeal. The ordeal was simple, yet terrifying. Anyone accused of a crime, from theft to treason, was forced to swallow a poisonous nut from the Tangena tree. If the accused vomited it out and survived, they were declared innocent. If they died, they were guilty in the eyes of the law. Under previous kings, the Tangena trial had been used sparingly. But Ranavalona made it law. And so, the ordeal became not just a test of guilt, but a weapon of mass control. Some historians believe as much as half the population of Madagascar may have died from executions, poison trials, starvation, or forced labor under her rule. Innocence was no protection. Even nobles, priests, or royal relatives could be forced to swallow the poison if they drew the queen's suspicion. The message was clear. Ranavalona's will was law. Ranavalona herself justified her brutality in a chilling proclamation. "The kingdom is mine and I will rule it as I wish. The foreigners seek to change our customs and our faith. But I will protect Madagascar even if blood must flow." To her subjects, this was not the voice of a gentle mother. It was the decree of a tyrant. At the same time, Ranavalona grew increasingly hostile toward Christianity. King Radama I had welcomed British missionaries who brought schools, medicine, and the Bible. But Ranavalona saw this new faith as a threat, a doorway for foreign influence and a danger to her absolute power. She banned Christianity outright. Missionaries were expelled. Malagasy converts were hunted down, imprisoned, tortured, and killed. Some were speared, others thrown from cliffs, and many were forced to the Tangena poison ordeal. Under Ranavalona, fear became part of daily life. Citizens never spoke freely. A careless word could be reported to the queen. Trials were public, turning executions into grim spectacles. Families lived in silence, never knowing if the knock at their door would come. Paranoia ruled the land, and no one was beyond suspicion. Yet, there was a strange paradox to her reign. For all her cruelty, Ranavalona fiercely resisted European colonization. She pushed back against French and British influence, refusing to let Madagascar become another colony. Some argue that her brutality was not madness, but strategy. By ruling with terror, she ensured absolute loyalty. By crushing foreign religions, she preserved Malagasy traditions. Was she a mad queen, or a ruthless patriot? Historians still debate. But for those who lived under her rule, the debate meant little. All they knew was fear. The Tangena ordeal became the symbol of her rule. A single nut of poison that could decide life or death. In her first years, Ranavalona proved that mercy had no place in her kingdom. But the years ahead would bring even greater horrors. Forced labor, torture, and rivers of blood. Screen fades to black. Drumbeats echo. Under Queen Ranavalona, survival was not just about avoiding poison. It was about enduring the back-breaking burden of forced labor. Every man, woman, and child belonged to the queen. Ranavalona revived and expanded the ancient system called Fanampoana, unpaid forced labor. In theory, every subject owed the queen service. In practice, it became a machine of suffering. Men were taken from their families to build roads, palaces, and fortresses. Women were forced to carry heavy loads for soldiers. Thousands died of exhaustion, disease, and hunger. Refusal was not an option. To resist was to invite torture or death. Ranavalona ordered colossal projects. The royal palace at Antananarivo expanded into a symbol of her power. Massive fortifications built by blood and sweat. Roads cutting through jungles, connecting territories under her iron hand. But for the people, these monuments were not symbols of pride. They were tombstones of their suffering. While Europe expanded across Africa, Ranavalona slammed Madagascar's doors shut. She expelled foreign traders, missionaries, and envoys. She executed spies and imprisoned those who dared meddle. To her, outsiders were not allies, they were threats. Europe saw Madagascar as a jewel waiting to be taken. But Ranavalona stood in their way. With blood and steel, she kept the colonizers at bay. In 1829, French forces attempted to invade Madagascar. Ranavalona's warriors, armed with traditional weapons, faced muskets and cannons. But the queen had prepared. She used ambushes, terrain, and sheer numbers to drive the invaders back. It was a shocking victory. She had beaten the French. But the price was immense. Thousands of her own soldiers died, forced to fight with little food, poor weapons, and no choice but obedience. Ranavalona's paranoia meant Madagascar was cut off from outside knowledge. While the world advanced with new medicine, new weapons, and new ideas, Madagascar stagnated. Her people starved in famine. Epidemics spread. But instead of aid, they were given more labor, more ordeals, more suffering. To protect her throne, she turned her kingdom into a prison guarded by fear. Even her closest advisors lived in constant terror. A single suspicion from Ranavalona could mean execution. European envoys described her as charming one moment, deadly the next. A smile could precede a feast, or a massacre. No one ever knew which Ranavalona they would face, the cunning ruler, or the merciless tyrant. One of the most brutal policies was her military campaigns. Tens of thousands of commoners were conscripted to carry supplies, rice, weapons, even soldiers on their backs, through mountains and jungles. Many never returned. Entire villages were emptied. Mothers wept as their sons and husbands were marched away. For Ranavalona, the people were not citizens. They were tools to be used and discarded. The queen had built roads, palaces, and fortresses, but they were built on the bones of her people. She had kept Madagascar free from foreign control. Yet inside her kingdom, freedom was a forgotten word. Ranavalona had proven herself not just a survivor, but a ruler who would sacrifice anything and anyone to remain on the throne. Screen fades to black. Drumbeats echo like marching footsteps. Life under Ranavalona was not life, it was survival. Every sunrise brought fear. Every whisper carried danger. And every day, someone faced a fate worse than death. It was a lottery of survival. Innocence or guilt mattered little. What mattered was fear. Ranavalona's punishments were not swift. They were designed to terrify. Spearing, victims tied to posts, pierced slowly with spears. Cliff deaths, Christians and rebels thrown from the cliffs of Ampamarinana, their bodies shattered on the rocks below. Slow fire, prisoners burned alive, their screams echoing across the hills. Starvation prisons, entire families locked in pits, left to die without food. To her, execution was not justice. It was theater. A show of terror staged to keep the kingdom in check. Christianity was seen as treason. Converts were accused of betraying tradition, of inviting foreign control. Missionaries had already been expelled. But Malagasy Christians practiced in secret, meeting at night, whispering hymns, hiding Bibles under mats. Ranavalona unleashed a wave of persecution. Believers were arrested, tortured, and executed. Many were thrown from cliffs. Others were forced into Tangena ordeals. Survivors were enslaved, branded as traitors. To follow Christ under Ranavalona was to embrace death. Yet thousands did. Their faith became an act of defiance, and their martyrdom a scar on the land. Everyday life became a dance with death. A child's careless word could send a family to trial. Farmers risked execution if they failed to meet impossible food quotas. Even nobles bowed in trembling silence, afraid of catching the queen's eye. In the streets of Antananarivo, laughter died. Trust disappeared. Neighbors became spies. Fear was the only language spoken. On special occasions, Ranavalona staged mass killings. Hundreds, sometimes thousands, gathered to watch prisoners executed in public squares. The queen believed such spectacles strengthened her rule. To her subjects, these killings were a warning. To her enemies, they were a promise. Ranavalona's reign was not just about ruling Madagascar, it was about crushing its spirit. Christians secretly smuggled messages. Some villagers hid fugitives. Families passed down tales of survival. but most simply endured. For the common people, life under the Mad Queen was not measured in years, but in days survived. Ranavalona ruled not with love, but with terror. Her kingdom was a paradise turned prison. Her people captives in their own land. But the years ahead would bring even greater torment, famine, betrayal, and the slow decay of her empire. Decades had passed. Ranavalona had ruled longer than any monarch in Madagascar's history. She was older but not weaker. If anything, her paranoia grew sharper with every year. The Mad Queen's final chapter was as dark as her beginning. By the 1850s, Ranavalona was in her 70s, an extraordinary age for her time. But she remained ruthless. Advisors were executed on the slightest suspicion. Nobles who whispered about succession were poisoned. Even her own family lived in terror of her moods. Her body weakened, but her cruelty never aged. As the queen grew older, questions of succession became dangerous. Her only son, Rakoto, later Radama II, was young, educated, and far more open to European influence. He secretly despised his mother's brutality. Rakoto even plotted with French envoys, promising to end her tyranny once he took the throne. Ranavalona did not know the full extent of her son's betrayal, but she sensed the whispers, and her paranoia deepened. In 1857, a bold attempt was made to overthrow the queen. French officers, along with Rakoto and several nobles, conspired to depose Ranavalona and replace her with her son. But the plot collapsed. Loyalists discovered the plan and the French were expelled. Ranavalona was furious, but surprisingly she spared her son's life. Why she did not kill him remains a mystery. Perhaps she wished to ensure her bloodline survived. Perhaps even she could not bring herself to slay her only child. Though Ranavalona still ruled with terror, the kingdom itself was crumbling. Roads and fortresses had been built, but at the cost of countless lives. Trade had collapsed due to her isolationist policies. Famine spread, taking more lives than war ever had. Technology and medicine from abroad were absent, leaving Madagascar behind as the world advanced. Her people were exhausted. Her kingdom weakened. The Mad Queen had kept Madagascar free from foreign conquest. But in doing so, she had bled it dry. By 1861, Ranavalona was nearly 80 years old. She grew frail, her voice weaker, but her paranoia did not leave her. Servants whispered she saw shadows in her chamber, that she believed spirits of those she executed haunted her nights. Perhaps the blood of thousands had finally come to visit her in dreams. Perhaps even the Mad Queen could not escape the ghosts of her past. On August 16, 1861, Queen Ranavalona I died in her sleep. She had ruled Madagascar for 33 years, one of the longest and most brutal reigns in African history. Her death was met not with mourning, but with relief. Crowds rejoiced quietly. Nobles whispered prayers of thanks. The kingdom exhaled for the first time in 3 decades. Scene: bells toll in the capital, people silently gathering, faces showing cautious hope instead of grief. The tyrant was gone. The island could finally breathe. Her son, Rakoto, ascended the throne as Radama II. He reversed her policies, opening Madagascar to Europeans, restoring Christianity, and ending the Tangena ordeal. But her shadow lingered. The kingdom she left behind was fractured, its people scarred by fear. Historians still debate her legacy. To some, she was a monster, a paranoid queen who drenched her land in blood. To others, she was a patriot, a ruler who, through terror, kept Madagascar independent at a time when Africa was being swallowed by colonial powers. Was she mad, or was she cunning? Was she a tyrant, or a protector? Perhaps she was all of these things. But one truth is beyond question. Queen Ranavalona's reign remains one of the bloodiest, most terrifying chapters in history. Paradise turned prison. A queen remembered in whispers, and a reign written in blood.